You know what? In the end, if when you get on your bike it makes you smile, then it's a good bike for you. All right, welcome back everyone. So it occurred to me not long ago that I had passed the 2-year anniversary with my Himalayan, and I thought it would be worthwhile to put out a comprehensive review. Now I'm going to tell you right off the bat that you can go back and you can watch the reviews that I put out at both 1,000 miles and at 1 year, and I'm going to tell you right now that not a lot has changed. In addition to that, essentially everything that I'm going to tell you for the most part is pretty well documented in other reviews online. So there's nothing here that I'm going to tell you that's overwhelmingly groundbreaking or different from other reviews. Now, with that all said, I do still think it's worth me going through my own personal list of pros and cons with this bike for 2 reasons. One is, well, because everyone has their own story as to why they're looking for a motorcycle or why they might be looking for this specific motorcycle. What's your purpose? What's your motivation? What's your end goal? But also because if you do go back and you watch my review from a year ago, I would essentially tell you that there's one significant epiphany that I've had in the last year regarding this bike that I think also maybe speaks to perhaps where I'm headed in the future, and I think that's worth spending a little bit of time on. Now, the first thing that I'd like to do is to tell you briefly about my story so that I can put into context why it is that I bought any motorcycle to begin with, but then why it is that I bought this motorcycle. Now, if you go back a couple years, I essentially brought this channel completely back to life from the grave, introducing this motorcycle. I had not posted any sort of content on this channel in years, and I ultimately posted that first video because I bought this bike and because I was excited about the adventure portal that I was ostensibly opening with this purchase. Now, I learned to ride a motorcycle all the way back when I was 16 years old, and I won't tell you how many years ago that was. I learned on a 1978 Honda Twin Star 185cc motorcycle, and it was awful. It didn't run well, it sputtered, it stalled, but it was a great bike to both learn on and to also understand kind of the basics of how a motorcycle works. So that's when I learned to ride. Now, I rode for a few years there at the end of my high school years, and then went to college and kind of didn't ride for a while, and then bought a obnoxiously huge motorcycle right when I graduated from college. I bought a Kawasaki Vulcan 750cc motorcycle. The thing was enormous. I'm 5'9" with a 32-inch inseam, and that bike probably weighed 600 pounds or something ridiculous. Way too big of a machine for me. Needless to say, I rode the bike for that one summer, sold it, and then didn't ride again for over 15 years. But throughout that time, a seed had been planted, sort of an adventure seed, and I would constantly see these adventure riders or these dual sport riders out on their kind of old, beat up adventure dual sport bikes, and I knew that at some point in my life, I wanted that type of motorcycle. And then COVID happened. So in the spring of 2020, everything shut down, my university shut down, I started working from home, and on one evening, I was watching a random YouTube video of somebody, I don't even remember, crossing Kazakhstan on their motorcycle or something. And I said, you know what, dang it, today is the best day to finally do this. And so that was when I decided to start looking in earnest. And the first thing that I will tell you that attracted me to this bike, and this is, I guess, where we'll start into the pros and cons, is the look. I love the kind of old school, steel, utilitarian look to this bike, as opposed to all the plasticky fairings and sort of futuristic, bug-eyed looking KTMs and Kawasaki's and Hondas and all these things. I just loved that this has sort of that classic old school look to it. Now, along those lines, I think in general, Speaking as someone who came back to motorcycling after 15 years, this makes a great starter bike or a great restarter bike if you are away from motorcycling for a really long time. Like, I essentially had to relearn how to ride a motorcycle. Putting that aside though, I do think this is a great starter bike. It's got a nice low seat height as well. So if you're a shorter rider, you might be able to flat foot on this bike where you probably won't be able to on some of the typical dual sport bikes. I have a 32-inch inseam, and when I sit on this bike, I can absolutely flat foot with no problem. So for that respect, I can stand on this bike when I'm at a stoplight and just both feet and kind of just rock the bike between me. And especially when I have my adventure boots on, I have plenty of space. I even get a little bend in my knee. So if you are a shorter rider, under 5'9", this bike is a decent option for you. I think that it's simply fun to ride, and I know everyone says that, it's very cliche, but I enjoy riding this bike, and I think part of the reason that I enjoy it is because of the low-end torquey grunt to it. So it is really, really good if you just want to practice going slow on technical terrain. If and when you drop it, it can take a damn beating. So you've got these upper crash bars that come standard. I think they're a little smaller now. This is the 2021 model. I do think that they're a little more streamlined now. But I've put on aftermarket full crash bars, and I'm telling you, I've dropped this thing probably over a dozen times, and it's just, it totally takes a beating like you wouldn't believe. Now, with that said, I do have handguards on here, and most of the times that it has fallen on its side, usually it falls into the handguards, and you can see, these things are pretty scratched up. And that's been totally fine. There has not been any major primary damage that I've done to this bike, with two exceptions. One, I dropped it once on the left side, and I did bend the gear shifter assembly and had to get that replaced. And the second thing is this summer I dropped the bike while I was in Colorado, and I dropped it going a decent speed, and it actually bent the handlebars. So I had to get the handlebars replaced. My point is that this thing can take a beating. If you look back here, my panniers have definitely taken a beating. They're all scratched up. I've definitely dinged it up in places. If this was all a big plastic fairing here, I would have cracked it 3 times already. So the fact that it's got these beefy bars, I'm not terrified about dropping this. I would say tire-wise, it does come with pretty decent tires. Obviously, I put on aftermarket Mitas tires, which I think are fantastic. They've been a really awesome addition to the bike, have made it so much more stable, with better footing, better purchase in the off-road stuff, especially in sand and in loose dirt. So I really can't recommend those tires enough. Obviously, the price, everyone talks about the price of this bike, $5 grand-ish. And also, I think along those lines, I would say availability, which is ironic because when I wanted this bike, they were impossible to find. But I went down to the dealership a couple weeks ago, and they had 6 of them on their showroom floor. So these are definitely in stock now, and you could basically just walk into a dealership, at least here in Arizona, and buy one. But that does lead me into an interesting other pro, is that there are a plethora of mods and accessories. So I have done so many things to this bike. I won't get into it in this video, but just to name a few, obviously I've got the panniers, I've got my tool tubes, I've got my rack, I've changed the tires, I got the front handguards, I put on the custom mirrors, I added a taller windscreen, tons of little things all over the bike that I've modded. And for the most part, they were all super easy to get. Another really important pro to this bike is the maintenance. I think it's very easy to maintain, as I've shown in many of my videos. The oil changes take about an hour. They're very easy to do on your own. You don't need any special training. And then just recently I did my first valve adjustment myself, and while that was a little bit more tricky and time consuming, it was very doable by someone like me that's not a trained, highly skilled mechanic. It's a great bike to learn on. It's a great bike to tinker with. Everything is very accessible and kind of easy to get to for the most part. And so if you want a bike that you're not afraid to kind of play around with a little bit and have easy access to components, this is a great bike for that. Something that just personally, aesthetically, I like the instrument cluster. I think I like the kind of old school style with the analog needles. So just to wrap up my list of pros, a few more quick things. Obviously this bike is fuel injected, which I think is a pro, especially living at 7,000 feet here. I don't have to mess around with jets. I love that you can load the snot out of this thing if you want to take it on any sort of big multi-day camping trips. If you've watched any of my Colorado multi-day trip videos, you know that I had this thing like stacked up with duffels and crazy camping gear. I mean, this thing was loaded down. There's a lot that could be said about the suspension on this bike, pro and con, and this is where we're starting to sort of get into that gray area between pro and con. I think the suspension for what you're getting is entirely adequate. And that pretty much wraps up the list that I made of pros. I'm sure there's a lot more that I haven't talked about. But I mean, if you go back and you watch those other reviews, I basically ended each one with saying, you know what, in the end, if when you get on your bike, it makes you smile, then it's a good bike for you. Every time I get on this bike, I just smile and I get out into the woods and I tune out and I turn off my troubles and I just enjoy being out there and I enjoy just being on two wheels. It's just that simple. So in all that respect, I still do really love this bike. However, we should definitely talk about the cons before I let you go. Now again, most of these cons I've spoken about before. I'm just going to kind of run through them really quickly so that you can get an idea of what I prioritize. And then I will end this review with what I consider to be sort of the biggest epiphany that I've come to with respect to this bike. So I will leave you with that, but let me go through my list first. And again, most of this is going to be reviews. So the first con of this bike for me personally is that there is a distinct lack of dealer networks. So anytime I do need to go to a dealer, which is rare, I have to either get a trailer and trailer it down, or I have to coordinate some sort of ride to get down at the dealership. Now along those lines, I'm also going to tell you another con, and that is availability of parts. Now this might just be because of all the supply chain issues, but I've had to order a couple of parts from the dealership, and in both cases it took 4 months for the parts to come in. So it was very frustrating to actually order through a certified dealer. And in many cases, when I do need a part, I just either go to Hitchcock's or I go to eBay and I try to find it just through an Indian dealer, because honestly, I can get the parts quicker and they're Royal Enfield certified parts. Speaking of parts and things like that, I think it's worth noting that a lot of people have talked about how this bike has a really hard time in the cold, and I think that that's a legitimate complaint. The bike does not like to start when it's very cold out. Right now it's probably 40 degrees here Fahrenheit in Flagstaff, and if I tried to start the bike, it would definitely struggle. Once it gets warmed up, it's fine, but I do think it's worth noting that if you get this bike, it's very likely you're going to have to do almost immediately a couple of things to it. And those three things are, I would recommend replacing your fuel injection and fuel pump relays under the seat, and Hitchcock sells upgraded relays. The second is I would adjust your throttle position sensor slightly to the recommended voltage. And I don't know what that voltage is, but it's easy to look up. Basically, these are tuned from the factory a little low, and so they have a really hard time idling. And then thirdly, I would go under the seat and adjust your idle speed ever so slightly up, just 1/8 of a turn. And I did those three things, and while she still does struggle sometimes to start in the cold, I've never had a stalling issue since. So as long as you do those three things, I don't suspect you will have any issues with stalling. You'll always have issues with it starting a little sluggish in the cold, but that's just the nature of the bike. Along those lines, I would also recommend always keeping it on a trickle charger on the wall. Every time I park this in the garage, I put it on the little battery tender, and I still have the factory battery in it 2 years later. Everyone talks about, you gotta replace the battery with a lithium battery. I still have the factory battery in it, and it works great. Never had a problem with it. It never loses charge. So my philosophy is you keep your bikes on a trickle charger when they're parked, and you'll never have a problem. So I talked about the parts. I think the service interval is kind of a con. 3,000 miles for oil changes and valve adjustments every 3,000 miles is a bit of a pain. And then obviously one of the big elephants in the room is the overall performance, the speed particularly. Everyone talks about it. This bike will not go comfortably at interstate highway speeds. That's just the bottom line. Have I taken it on the interstate? Absolutely. I've taken it on the interstate all the time. But usually when I do, I tuck into the slow lane, I get behind a semi-tractor trailer, and I kind of cruise along at 70 or 72 miles per hour. Now again, I'm a smaller guy, 5'9", 155, 160 pounds. I can get this up comfortably to kind of low to mid 70s and cruise along at that speed as long as the road is relatively flat. No problem. I've gotten it up probably top speed ever into the low 80s, but that was probably on a downhill fully loaded. Now when I've had this thing loaded up for Colorado, even on a flat road, it struggles to get to 70. And then if I'm going uphill, I'm downshifting into fourth and I'm maybe going 65, probably closer to 62 or something like that. So those are the speeds we're talking about here. Now I don't have too many cons left, just a few little things that I want to touch on. I talked about the handlebars bending very easily. That is something to keep in mind if you drop the bike. These handlebars aren't the stiffest, so there's a good chance that you could bend them. Now I talked about how I liked the instrument cluster, but I think it's also worth noting that there's some downsides to it too, and that it is kind of cheap plastic, and so on several occasions I've noticed that it rattles or like makes buzzing noises, and I've had to get in there and kind of tinker with it. And that sort of speaks to the bike in general. There's a lot of places on the bike that rattle or buzz or kind of cheaper plastic, and I've had to put like electrical tape over things just to kind of keep them from rattling. One other quick thing I would say that I got bit by this summer was the tires. I can certainly tell you that this summer when I got that flat in the middle of nowhere in Colorado, I would have certainly loved to have just been able to plug it and proceed on, but I had to completely take the tire off and have it replaced in the tube, and then my spare tube had a hole in it too, and it was just a huge mess. So tubes kind of suck. And so that's really all I have to say about the tires. And honestly, that's kind of all I really have to say about the bike when it comes to the cons. There's a lot of little things, little niggles that I could talk about, little annoyances, but honestly, like you've heard them all before, and they kind of come with any bike. So I think what I'd like to do now is talk about that big epiphany that I've had and kind of where I think I'm headed in the future, and I think what probably equates to me to being the biggest con of this bike that I have come to realize in the 2 years of owning it. And that is the weight. This bike is heavy. It's over 440 pounds, I think, and then if you load it up with your gear, you're probably over 500 at that point. What I've come to realize is that it's heavy enough for me and my strength where if it starts to tip, I can't save it. It goes. And I think part of the reason I've come to this realization is because I've spent so much time on the Honda Trail 125, which is obviously at the very extreme other end of this conversation. The Honda Trail 125 weighs something like 240 pounds or something. So over 200 pounds lighter. But I love when I ride it that I can like lean it all the way over and just hold it and then pick it back up. It's so absolutely light that I love being able to have that much control over it. And because it's so light, I am much more willing to take it places that are more challenging. When I'm on this bike and I get into a situation where something's really technical, I get really nervous because not only am I worried am I going to drop it, but then I'm worried if I do drop it, I'm not going to be able to pick it back up because it's really heavy. And yes, you pick it up from behind or you kind of push into it to pick it up. I've done all the different techniques, I've practiced them all. But sometimes you're on a weird slant with like loose scree and like you try to pick it up and it just doesn't want to pick up. And I've been in situations where I've had to literally take all my gear off the back just to pick it up, only to put all my gear back on it again. And it's such a pain. And so what I'm trying to say is, obviously the weight is because it's got all the utilitarian metal and the crash bars, and my added crash bars probably added another 15 pounds. So I mean, I get it. It's heavy because it's steel. It's a beast, it's a tank, it's a tractor, whatever you want to call it. That's part of the charm. And it's, you know, it's nice that it's got a low center of gravity. So even though it is heavy, I can still kind of control it fairly well. But what I'm trying to tell you is that what I'd like to do in the future is move to a bike that is lighter. I don't know how much lighter. I don't know what that sweet spot is. Obviously, a Trail 125 is too light. Never could take a bike like that on the highway. But 440 pounds or whatever, 450 plus pounds is too much for a bike that I want to do dual sport things on. So what that should be telling you is that the bikes that I've been looking at recently are more dual sport oriented. I haven't bought anything, I haven't sold this yet or anything like that. I still love riding this bike, and I love the low-end tractor grunt of this bike, which is hard to find on dual sports, something that's sort of this much of a tank. But the weight has really, really opened my eyes to what's possible with a bike that's lighter. And of course, the downside for me is most of those lighter bikes also are way taller. And so trying to find something that fits my 32-inch inseam where I'm not going to be tippy-toeing on a bike is going to be hard. I'm probably going to have to get a lowered seat or lowering links or lowering suspensions or something like that. But all that's to say, my review is over. I love this bike. I have no plans to sell it just yet. I do have a deposit on a potential future bike, but it's back ordered for months, so who knows what's going to happen with that. But even if I get that bike, I don't know if I'm going to sell this. I have to figure out what I'm going to do. I kind of have a rule of two Star Wars Sith garage rule where I only want to have two bikes at any one time, an adventure bike and a scooter commuter bike. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do. So thank you so much for following along. I hope that this review was helpful. If you have any questions about my experience now that I've had this bike for 2 years, please put them in the comments below. I'm happy to tell you anything and tell you honestly, give you a real opinion of my experience. And take care, be safe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. And really quick, I'm gonna end this review with some highlight clips that I've put together of some of my best adventures on this bike, because she has brought me so much joy, so many smiles, that it's worth highlighting some of my best memories. So thanks again, take care, see you in the next video. Bye.
Oh my gosh, look at this road, it goes straight up. This is wild. Oh, look at those switchies on the map too. Oh, this is gonna be an insane ride. Yikes, okay, that was a little scary. Gosh, what a fantastic road. Highly recommend. Valley of the Gods. Look it up. Man, this day just keeps getting better. Look at this road. And this right here, my friends, is Black Bear Pass Road. Red Mountain Pass, 11,000 feet. Okay, that was a little scary. I don't know, I'm kind of glad that we took the scenic route. This is ending up being really cool. How about that? Little stream crossing. Not bad. Have we made it? Is this it? Oh, sweet Jesus. Woo! A little bit too close to the edge over there. Let's tuck it in tight against the wall. Oh my gosh, look at this cliff edge. Oh man, look at those switchies that we just came up. That is bonkers. Whew, baby.